Hello, Gary and Larry. Nice to see you online. Lovely to gather together. We'll get started here. We're in the Sukkah on Ziering Family Field. It's been a while since I've said broadcasting, coming live to you from outside on the field, but it's really lovely to see all the people here in person, and also to be gathered here live with people who are joining us via live stream. We are going to begin in Sidor Lev Shalem on page 214. We are doing Shabbat. That just went out there. Okay. We're going to be doing Shabbat Minha, which is also Yom Tov Mincha. So I'll guide us through those pages. And in addition to that, we're going to be doing, when we do our Sudash Lishit and our learning, following that, we'll be doing a Yom Tov Maariv, because we're moving from Shabbat and Yom Tov into just Yom Tov. So that's what we're doing here together tonight. So here we are, page 214 in Sidor Lev Shalem. אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יללוך סלע, אשרי עם שככה לו, אשרי עם שאדוני אלוהיו, תהילה לדוד. תהילת אדוני ידבר פי, יברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד. ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה. ובא לציון גואלנו שבי יפה ביעקב נאום אדוני, אני זו פשיטו. ואתה קדוש יושב תהילות ישראל, וקרא זה זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו, כמלין תמיד אמן. ותישאני רוח ושמע אחרי כל רעש גדול, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, תלתני רוח. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיר תורה וידיר. So before we move any further, because if we had a minion here, then hang on, let me see which of the, oh, this one's also working. Okay, great. If we had a minion here, then we would be moving on to Chatzi Kaddish, opening the Ark, and reading from Vizot HaBracha, reading from the very, very last Torah portion in the whole of the 5 books of Moses, the whole scroll. And then, when will we read from that Torah portion next? Anybody know? Fun trivia.
Next Saturday.
Put the guesses out there. When's the next time we read from it? When's the next time we read Torah? The next time we read Torah is tomorrow morning, because it's the second day Yom Tov, but we're not reading Vizot HaBracha, we're reading the readings for Sukkot day 2. Then we have Chol HaMoed Sukkot, and on Chol HaMoed Sukkot, we are not reading Vizot HaBracha either. We have special readings for Chol HaMoed Sukkot, the intermediate days of Sukkot. Also not that reading. What's the next time we read Torah? Shabbat morning of Shemini Atzeret, also not Vizot HaBracha, also special readings for Shemini Atzeret. And Shabbat, we just divide those readings up into 7 readings, the Shemini Atzeret readings, but divided up into 7. And then Shabbat afternoon. Shabbat afternoon is the next time when we read from Vizot HaBracha. Okay, Shabbat afternoon of Shemini Atzeret. Here, Chutz La'aretz, outside of the land of Israel, we read it on Saturday afternoon. And then next Saturday night, when we move from Shemini Atzeret into Simchat Torah, that night, and then the following day at Simchat Torah, we read over and over and over again, the end of the Torah, until we then rewind the Torah the following day. V'zot HaBracha gets read again and again and again, the end of the Torah, because we're kind of lingering in it, right? We're lingering in the end of the Torah. We don't want to leave it. We keep going back to it. And also because there's a specific date on our calendar, Simchat Torah, when we basically do a rewind. We have a set date on our calendar when we're going to start again from Bereshit. If we were to own only one Sefer Torah, only one scroll, then that's the date on which that one scroll would be rewound. Instead, we're very lucky and fortunate to be in a community where we have lots of scrolls. So we can have this scroll set to Vizot HaBracha and other scrolls set to other places. That's exactly what's going on. We have this scroll set to Vizot HaBracha, other scrolls set to other places. And Vizot HaBracha itself also is something that we get to do over and over again, because the timing each year doesn't necessarily fall out the same. It's not always the case that the first day of Sukkot and therefore Shmini Atzeret fall out on Shabbat. So Vizot HaBracha can be read more or less depending on the way that all the Chagim and Shabbatot fall out, all the way that the holidays and Shabbat fall out. So this year we're reading it now, and then again we're reading it on Yom Tov. I was offering that explanation, first of all, because I find it confusing each year, and it's nice to return to it each time. I also wanted to give us a moment just in case we're going to make a minyan in person. Waiting to see if we got a minyan here, but not quite yet. Are you laning for us today? No. Okay. We also don't have our laning here. Oh, we just also don't have a minyan at the moment, so it doesn't matter in any case. Yeah.
I was going to ask you for an explanation. I was very
Oh.
confused about the whole.
I'm so glad that fell out. I anticipated the question. So in the absence of a minyan, I still want us to read Vizot HaBracha. I feel strongly that we should always chant even when we don't have a minyan here. I like to chant from the Parsha. So what we're going to do is, in the absence of a minyan, we'll say the bracha for studying, and we'll open up and we'll read from the Parsha. Could someone pass me a chumash, please? An extra Eitz Chaim? Oh, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Hey. Page 1202. I'll turn the screen here 1 second. And we begin with the blessing, thanking God for the opportunity to study together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we should always have blessings. And again, on page 1202, that's where we have it in the Eitz Chaim book. We begin with verse 1. V'zot habracha asher birach Moshe ish Elohim et bnei Yisrael lifnei moto vayomar Adonai misinai ba v'zarach miseir lamo hofia mehar paran ve'ata mervavot kodesh mimino eshtat lamo חובב עמים, כל הקדושה בידיך והם תקעו לרגליך, יישא מדברותיך, תורה ציווה לנו משה מורשה, קהילת יעקב, ויהי בשרון מלך, והתאסף ראשיהם יחד שבטי ישראל, יחי ראובן ועל ימות, ויהי מטב מספר, וזאת ליהודה, ויאמר ויאמר שמע אדוני כל יהודה ואל עמו תביאנו ידיו רב לו ועזר מצריו תהיה. On verse 8. ולוי אמר תומך ואורך לאיש חסידך אשר ניסיתו במסע ריבהו על מי מריבה אומר לאביו ולאמו לא ראיתיו ואת אחיו לא הכיר ואת בניו לא ידע כי שמרו אמרתך uvritecha yinsoru yoru mishpatecha liakov toratecha Yisrael yasim hu ketorah v'yapecha v'chlihil al mizbechecha barech Adonai chelo ufol yadav tirtzeh mechatz motnaim kamav sanav mikumun levinim bar yidid Adonai shkon levetach alav chofef alav kol hayom umen ketefav shachein. Finally on verse 13. Liasef Amar Mevorechat Adonai Artso Mimeged Shamai Mital Umitahum Rovetza Tachai Mimeged Fuot Shamesh Umimeged Geresh Yerachim Mirosh Harikedem Umimeged Givot Olam Umimeged Eretz Umloach Urtzon Shochni Sene Tavota Lerosh Yosef Ulkod Ko Nazir Echav Bechorshoro Hadartho the Karneim Karnavahe Mamim Inagach Yachtav Afse Aretz Vehem Rivot Ephraim Vehem Alfei Menashe. We're still at 9, so we're going to move into the Amidah shortly. I have another trivia question before we move into it. We just went through when we read, where are we at 10? Oh, I have to count myself. That's a good idea. Okay. All right. But we just read through this. And also we have to be mindful of how much time we have left for Mincha. So I have a very important question because we're about to do the Mincha Amidah. Now that we're at 10, we can actually do a repetition of the Mincha Amidah. So the question for you is this. When we do the Mincha Amidah, do we do a Shabbat Mincha with insertions for Yom Tov or a Yom Tov Mincha with insertions for Shabbat? Yom Tov Mincha with insertions for Shabbat. Why is that? Because why? It's not Chol HaMoed. Okay, correct. It is not Chol HaMoed, so we have to do a Shabbat. But why not a Shabbat? Why not a Shabbat Mincha with insertions for Yom Tov? Because the specialness of this day is Yom Tov, and also it just doesn't exist. Okay, the only thing that exists is a Yom Tov Mincha and the only thing that exists is a Yom Tov Amidah with insertions for Shabbat and not the inverse. And the reason why that only exists is because of the specialness of the day of Yom Tov. Exactly. Right, the closest we could get is Yale V'Yavo, which we would only have in Chol HaMoed in our intermediate days. So we're going to do a Yom Tov Amidah. So let me give you the page instructions, and we're going to do Chatzi Kaddish followed by whispered private Amidah for Mincha. We turn to page 222. After Chatzi Kaddish, we're going to turn to page 306. I'll invite you to rise now for Chatzi Kaddish. And at the end of Chatzi Kaddish, we turn to 306 for our own whispered private Amidah. Please make insertions for the days of Sukkot. So please make insertions for the day of Shabbat. We're on Sukkot, and make sure that you make the selections for the days of Sukkot. So the insertions for Shabbat will be in red, and the selections that we're on are for the days of Sukkot. So there'll be certain places where we select words that are for specific holidays, and those words for specific holidays have to do with the holiday of Sukkot. The insertions, which are in red, are for Shabbat, and we do include them because it's Shabbat. When we come back to it at the end of Shabbat, we're no longer going to be in the Yom Tov Amidah. We're on page 222. Yitkata, Vitkata, Shemperaba, Viam Madi Frakirte, Viam Likmokute, Bekayikon, Viam Ekon, Kayiko Bit Israel, Hagalavis Mankari, Viam Rua May, Shemeraba, Bevarak, Vilamo May I, Barak, Vishabaki Bar, Vishamavit Nase, Vitadar Vitale Vitala, Shemedikurisha, Virni, Hulela, Minkoberkata, Vishirata, Shushbakata, Venekamata, Shamirambe Hama, Vimru, Amen. 306 Shabbat and Sukkot. If you haven't yet completed your own private Amidah, please don't rush, continue at your own pace. Just a moment, we'll be back on page 306 for the repetition of the Amidah. When we complete the Kedusha on page 308 with the blessing Ha'el HaKadosh, you can be seated again. You're back on page 306. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei HaKol V'Zocher Chasdei Avot U'Mevi Goel Ibnei Bneihem L'man Shemo B'Ahava V'Lekozer V'Volkeinu Moshiach U'Makein Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham U'Volkein Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai V'Chayim Eitim Atara Lucia Mechokachim Bechesed, Mechim Mitim Rakamim Rapim, Samech Novelim Verofecholim Matirasurim, Kayim Monatoli Shene, Hafar Michamocha, Pal Givurot Melach, Melech Mitum Kayim, Motzmiach Yeshua, Venem Manatalekayot Mitim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayai Ametim. נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב ביד נביאך, וקרא זה ויאמר. קדוש, קדוש, קדוש אדוני צבאות מלוך לארץ כבודו, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, בדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור. ימלוך אדוני לעולם ולא יחזיון לדור ודור, הללויה, לדור ודור נגיד לך, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו יבינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי המלך גדול וקדוש אתה ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. אתה בחרתנו מכל עמים, אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו ורוממתנו מכל הלשונות, וקידשתנו במצוותיך, וקירבתנו מלכנו לעבודתך, ושמך הגדול והקדוש, עלינו קראת, ותיתן לנו, אדוני אלוהינו באהבה שבתות למנוחה ומועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון, את יום השבת הזה, ואת יום החג הסוכות הזה, זמן שמחתנו, באהבה המקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים, אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, יעלה ויבוא ויגיע ויראה, וירצה וישמע ויפקד ויזכר זיכרוננו ופקדוננו, וזיכרון אבותינו, וזיכרון משיח ודוד עבדך, וזיכרון ירושלים מעיר קודשך, וזיכרון כל עמך בית ישראל לבניך, לפליטה לטובה לחיינו חסר רחמים, לחיים ושלום ביום חג הסוכות הזה, זוכרנו אדוני אלוהינו בו לטובה, ופקדנו בו לברכה, ויושיענו בו לחיים. ובדבר ישוע ברחמים וחוס וחננו ורחם עלינו, ויושיענו כי אליך עינינו, כי מלך חנון ורחום אתה. עשיינו אדוני אלוהינו ברכת מועדך לחיים ושלום, לשמחה וששון כאשר רצית, ואמרת לברכנו, אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו רצי מנוחתנו קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, סלבינו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך, וטהר ליבנו לעבדך באמת, וחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה ורצון, בשמחה וששון שבת ומועדי קודשך, וישמחו בך ישראל מקדשי שמך, ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדיש השבה וישראל והזמנים. רצה אדוני אלוהינו ברכה ישראל וביא תפילתם, ישבת עבדלים ויראתך, ותפילתם באהבה תקבל ברצון, ותהיה רצון תמיד עבודת שלומך, ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, המחזיר שכינתו לציון. מודים אנחנו שאתה הוא לנו לזכות. התורגי לך לרחמך ברחם, כי לא תמו חסדיך מעולם, קיווינו לך. בגאולה מפרף ישמעון שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד, וכל החיים ידעו חסד, להביא את שמך באמת. האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו סלע, ברוך אתה אדוני, הטוב שמך וקנאי להודות. שלום רב על ישראל מלכה ועל כל יושבי תבל תשים לעולם, כי אתה הוא מלך אדון לכל שלום, וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל, בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל, בשלום. We turn back to page 231 for Kaddish Shalem. יתכתב ויקדש מרפא, ילמד יברח ירטב ימליך מלכותי בחייכון וימחנו חיי דחו בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב ימרו אמן. ישמי רבם וברך לעולם ולעולמי יתברך וישתבח ויפר וישמע וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריך ולילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונקמתה דמירם בימה וימרו אמן. תתקבל צלחות עונות עד כל ישראל קדם והודי וישמעיה וימרו אמן. יש להם רב מן שמי וחיים עלינו בכל ישראל וימרו אמן. עושה שלום Imravu, Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ilko Yisrael, Imru Amin. We rise or remain standing for Aleinu 231. Aleinu the Shabbat Ladon HaKol. Take another service. Kakatu b'toratech Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai melech kol haaretz v'yimahu yeh Adonai echad Ushmo Echad. Mourner's Kaddish, page 232. Yit Gadal, V'yit Kadash, Shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute. B'chayechon uvyomechon uchaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kari v'yimru amen. Yehi shemei rabba mevarach le'alam u'lamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitshomam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalal shemei dekudsha berichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata, Tamiram be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Shkoyach on everybody who came to make the minyan. It's important. Sukkot, it's tempting to stay in our own Sukkot. I'm appreciative of those of you who made time to be here in person. Also, those of you who are with us virtually to be a part of this minyan so that we can amongst other things, daven and say Kaddish and all that jazz. We're going to learn together shortly, but first we're going to eat in the sukkah. I'm just going to make a reminder to you that every time that we eat in the sukkah, regardless of what else is going on, after whatever blessing you say before whatever food you might eat, I invite you to additionally say the blessing that includes Elokeinu melech haolam asher kishan mitzvah leishev ba sukkah. You have to say it before every item you eat. If you say motzi, you can accompany it with a motzi blessing. If you say it with like mizonot, same thing. If you need it pointed out in a book, I'm more than happy to put that in front of you as well. There is absolutely no shame. In fact, it's preferable to look at a blessing in front of you, and I'm happy to show that to you as well. But it is a wonderful and beautiful thing to bless not only the food that we're eating in a sukkah, but the fact that we are experiencing it in the sukkah as well. So let's go eat a little bit of nosh, and wherever you are, I hope you can get something to nourish yourself as well. And we'll learn in a few minutes. We'll come back together and we'll do some learning while we're eating.
Where are you living in Washington?
It's hard to slow the talk part, but I hear you.
He's playing with my daughter.
Very good. As long as she found someone, that's great.
She's here so that they can play together.
But she really, Ella started this past year. She really started to love coming here, and even if it's just reading time for her, she's like, "Oh, it's getting out of the house. It's good."
Yeah, yeah.
What's your feeling?
Like kids of rabbis, they learn to maximize the opportunities that are presented to them in terms of being malleable.
Yeah, in terms of being valuable, and also like they understand that there are ways to like find space within a synagogue setting, not to make too much trouble, but like just to scope out a stuff. Like,
Yeah, right.
amen. Amen. All the brothers. Excellent. Ugh. A good one. I know, sorry, love you. How does she like coffee? Because her dad yeah, she's young. You're gonna go back and play. Everybody, whenever she gets coffee, they say, I don't think that's for you. And yeah, exactly. Okay, we're gonna get started in a moment. I'm gonna come around with source sheets. If you have a source sheet there virtually or printed one out before Shabbat or something, you can grab it. I'll come around. I did not staple these, sorry, but there are 2 pages. Thank you. I also like the bigger type because I need it now. I've just recently realized that my eyes need this bigger type, so I'm very excited about it. All right. So today we're going to talk about the etrog because in all the years that I've learned and studied on Sukkot or given a shiur on Sukkot, I've never done something on the etrog, and I'm kind of fascinated by it. In fact, this year, if anybody read the Herman article on the business of etrogim this year? Anyone read it yet? A great article. It's a front page article. It's fantastic. By Daniel Muller. That's what I meant. I don't know why I said Herman. It's on my mind. Thank you. I don't know why I said Herman. I meant Miller. It's been a long day. But the Miller article, it's fantastic. It's a great article. I highly recommend it. The business of etrogim is really interesting. And I read this other great article from several years back that I didn't include because ironically, it would have killed a lot of trees, or it would have honored the killing of a lot of trees, because it's a long article about the history of the etrog, which originated as a fruit in, anyone want to take a guess what part of the world? Not Persia. I heard it.
China.
That's correct. China. Thank you, Tybal. It originated in China. It is a fruit that originated in China as a five-fingered fruit that eventually, in its repollination in other parts of the world, became the singular, more lemon-looking fruit. I love to tell this story that when my husband was working at a facility for elderly folks in Connecticut, towards the end of our time in seminary, he would always bring etrogim because it's a real sensory experience for people who might not otherwise be able to participate in Jewish life. Jewish ritual life that's heavily sensory is really great. And the etrog is pungent. It's a very pungent experience. And there's this one woman who every year, he was there for about 3 years or so, would say, Rabbi, let me smell the holy lemon. Every year, let me smell the holy lemon. I think about it, let me smell the holy lemon every year. So this etrog, which we associate as a very particular type of fruit, originated in China and eventually found its way across the world. You can find great historical articles about the evolution of that fruit itself and how it became what it is. Today, what I want to talk about is the origin of the rabbinic imagination of the etrog, what they were imagining when they read about what would become the etrog in our Torah sources, and how it became the case that the thing that we pick up inside little boxes in padding is what we all envision as an etrog now, from what was once not necessarily describing this fruit that originated on the other side of the world. So I'm starting from Midrash, ancient Midrash, very, very old Midrash, a collection of stories on the book of Leviticus called Vayikra Rabbah. And this one is ascribed to Rabbi Mane. This is Rabbi Mani open. So Patach Rabbi Mane, or Rabbi Mane Patach. And he spoke about this little line from Tehillim. Kal atzmotai tomarna. I did not mispronounce that. I've actually been in an online conversation with people about the pronunciation about this line. I can't get too off topic or digress too much, but where do we see this line in our Siddur? In Pesukei de Zimra, not every day, but only on Shabbat and Yontiv. Where? In Nishmat Kol Chai, we say Kol Atzmotai Tomarna. That's usually how we pronounce it. It comes from Tehillim, Kol Atzmotai Tomarna. But some people claim that the pronunciation of this line should be Kal Atzmotai Tomarna. I cannot teach that shiur right now, but I'm working on a shiur on that pronunciation. I'm very excited about it because this actually came from the fact that my husband is now the Hebrew teacher at Beverly Vista Middle School, and one of his students came to him with this question. He said, Mr. Chorney, he goes by Mr. Chorney there, Mr. Chorney, is the word kol or kol in this line? And my husband, being a grammarian but also a davener, said it's kol atzmotai tomarna. And the student said, that's not what my rabbi says. And I give a lot of credit to my husband, who was not defensive about it at all and said, let me look into it. And as a matter of fact, there is a long-standing, hundreds of year old debate about the pronunciation of this line from Psalms. So either kol or kol atzmotai tomarna Adonai mi chamocha. If it's kol, then we translate it as all of my bones shall say, Lord, who is like you. We don't necessarily need to look at the other translation in order to continue with this midrash, this imagining of what the rest of what it might mean for all of our bones to praise God. This imagination goes on to think about lots of different accoutrements of the holiday, then being things that we use representing parts of our body praising God. Lo ne'emar pasuk ze ela. This pasuk, this line, was not spoken for anything other than bishvil lulav. It was spoken about lulav. That's all it was saying. That's all it was talking about. Hashidra shel lulav doma lashidra shel adam. The spine of the lulav, the palm branch, the straight part, the thing that we see sticking up in the middle of all of our palm trees all around here that are not native to the area. V'hahadas domeh la ayin. The hadas is like the eye, the shape of the eye, right? Va'arava doma la peh. And the arava, the willow, is like the mouth. V'ha'etrog, the etrog is like the lev. Halev. What is the lev? The lev is the heart, which in ancient consideration was the seat of wisdom. It was the seat of wisdom. It eventually would become connected with the notion of emotionality, but in the rabbinic mind and in parallel traditions to when Vayikra Rabbah would have been written, it would have been considered the seat of wisdom. The etrog is like the heart. And these are all what? Why are they comparisons? Why is the spine like the spine and the hadas like the eye? What's so similar? Like what are these? What's the comparison? The shape, right? It's the shape. The spine is like the spine. The shidra is like the shidra. And so the etrog is like our heart because what? What's that? Right, the lulav itself has a spine, and why is the etrog like the lev, like the heart? Somebody had done an autopsy, right? And they said that's what the heart looks like. Like this is what it's like, and it is roughly the same shape and size. One of the things that I like, I'm not even going to finish the midrash. It's a lovely midrash, but that's not what we're here to do. I am mentioning this because the etrog is like when this Vayikra Rabbah imagining of the etrog being like the lev, when they say, oh, the etrog is like a heart, we can imagine it, right? Can we imagine it and picture it and say, oh, that's a nice simile, right? That's a very nice simile. That's a very pretty picture. The etrog is like the heart. So already we are picturing what they are picturing, probably something pretty similar. Do you have a hand, Joey? Yeah. Beautiful. Lulav and lalev have the same root. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Hold that thought. When we get to our last source, we're going to come back to that. It won't have to do with our main point, but it's still a lovely thought. Okay. So now you know that in ancient imaginings, already we have this idea of the etrog, this idea of a fruit of some kind of species of some kind that kind of looks like what we kind of picture already in some way. You believe me that we're like already talking about this kind of a fruit of some kind. Now we're going to jump into the Talmud. The Talmud is codified roughly in the year 600 of the Common Era. So you can put yourself in that time zone, okay, about 1500 years ago. And already they're bringing something, thankfully, all of the stuff I want to remind you that's not in bold in the English in Sepharia is not there in the Aramaic or the Hebrew. The stuff in bold in English in Sepharia is there in the Hebrew or Aramaic and very occasionally French. The stuff that's not in bold is there to help us understand or to make the sentences sound more like English. Got it? So when it's not in bold and it says it was taught in the Tosefta, that is the helper Sepharia text telling us that when we see the word Tana, Taf Nun Aleph, that's there to tell us that we're learning something that's being brought from a Tosefta-like text. In this case, it's from the Tosefta. The Tosefta is either a text that's earlier than the Mishnah or parallel to the Mishnah, depending on whether or not you studied with Rabbi Dr. Judith Hauptman, and depending on like your theory of it, but basically we're talking about a text from 400 years even before the Talmud that we're about to read. Here's what the text said. A dry lulav is unfit. It's pasul. It's not kosher. Rabbi Yehuda, who is the organizer of the Mishnah, says, machshir, it's fit. Amar Rava, machloket belulav. So Rava said there is a dispute that has to do with the lulav. De Rabbanan Savri, Makshinan Lulav Le'etrog. So he says we talk about comparing the lulav to the etrog, and it has to do with the verses. Ma etrog ba'e hadar, af lulav ba'e hadar. Just as the etrog is related to or comes from the notion of the word hadar, which means what? Beauty. So it's connected to a verse that has to do with beauty. Af, even also, the lulav comes from a verse with the word beauty. The Rabbi Yehuda Savar, and Rabbi Yehuda held or holds, his opinion still holds, la makshinan lulav le'etrog. He says we don't compare these two things. They are not alike. Aval be'etrog divrei hakol hadar be'enan. But everyone, with regard to this etrog, says that we do agree when it comes to requiring hadar, the beauty. So not everybody agrees that the lulav has to be connected to the notion of hadar or beauty, but everyone agrees that the etrog must be connected to hadar or beauty. The reason is, and you see it not in the bold, because the verse that it's connected to has to do with, and this comes from the verses that were read in the chapter 23, pre-Eitz Hadar. Pre-Eitz Hadar. What is pre-Eitz Hadar? Pre-fruit of the Eitz, a tree, Hadar, of beauty, or that's beautiful. And a pre-Eitz Hadar gets translated as etrog eventually. They become synonymous. Pre-Eitz Hadar becomes synonymous with etrog. Dry etrogim, remember that from the very beginning, the idea was the question of whether or not a dried out lulav was okay, or whether or not and therefore whether or not a dried etrog is okay. So a dried out lulav, probably okay, depends on which of these rabbis you're following, their opinion, but it might be okay because we don't necessarily all agree that a lulav has to be connected to hadar, but everyone agrees that we may not use a dried out etrog. We're gonna keep going in Sukkah in 31a, but I want to plant a question. Don't answer it yet, okay? Don't answer it. I just want you to think about it. Why are we talking about dried out etrogim? Don't answer yet, just think about it. Why might somebody come and ask the question, can I use a dried out etrog? Think about it. Think about it. Hold that thought. We're going to keep reading. The Gemara asks another question. Uve etrog mi bai Rabbi Yehuda Hadar. So what about Rabbi Yehuda's opinion about etrog? We haven't heard it yet. The Hatanya, isn't it taught, and they're talking about a baraita, an earlier rabbinic teaching, arba'at minin sheba lulav, with regard to the four, meaning the species that are in a lulav, which includes the etrog, keshem she'ein pochatin mehen kach ein mosifin alehem. Just as you may not take away from the number of items that you have, you may not add items. So you can't have two things. You can't have two species. You can't have 18 species in it. You can't make a big bouquet. Lo matzah etrog, lo yavi lo parish, lo rimon, velo davar acher. And if lo matzah etrog, I don't know why we don't have the word if, lo matzah etrog, imagine the if. If he didn't find an etrog, he shouldn't bring not a parish, that's a quince. Anyone seen a quince before? Is that familiar? A quince? I've seen a quince. Google it after Yom Tov. It's very interesting. I should have brought these fruits to show you as like a show and tell. Velo rimon, shouldn't bring a pomegranate. Velo davar acher, not anything else at all. They just gave up giving us a list. Nothing else. Don't bring something else. Kemushin. If they're dry, kesherin. They are, kemushin is, the way to describe it is it's like Gummy. Yeah, yeah. It's like if it becomes like ra raisined. Does that make sense? Raisined? Okay, great. That's a word, raisined. That's it is. It's not a word, it's an image. Okay. It's raisined and it's shriveled. If it's shriveled, that's fine. Yevashin, completely dried out. Okay. When I said dried, I meant raisin, but I realized that when I got to Yevashin, that wasn't going to be helpful. So Kimushin, like kind of raisiny and wrinkly and a little bit dried out. Kashirin, it's fine. Yevashin, totally dried out. Basulin, it's not fit. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af Yevashin. Rabbi Yehuda said, answering the question from the beginning of this paragraph, even if it's completely dry, it's fit. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to answer my question. I'll re-ask it. Why are we asking the question, is it okay to bring a completely dried out etrog? Why might someone have that as a legitimate question to, quote unquote, ask the rabbi? Why would this come up? So Rose is asking if there's an association with dried out being dead. It is, as a matter of fact, yes. But my question is, why do we think that people are asking if they can? In fact, if it is permitted to bring it, I'm going to actually I'm going to call on Tybal, who's nicely raising her hand here, and then I'm going to call on AJ and move around the table this way. Yeah, Tybal.
Because it's so fragrant, people save it, and you have to make sure it's this year's etrog and not last year's etrog.
So you said it's so fragrant, people save it?
Yes, so you might have one from last year and the year before and whatever, and do you need to get a new one?
Fantastic. So let's keep it very simple. You might have last year's etrog because it still smells lovely. May you still use it? Leave it at that. That's a great reason for the question. Good. AJ, what's another reason someone might ask? So two things I hear in there. Number one, it can be quite rare and hard to find. And secondarily, if you find it and it's a bit shriveled up, or maybe even dried by the time you find it on the tree, is it permissible? Great. Did I see another hand over here somewhere? Okay, I'll go to Nico and then I'll come over. And if you haven't met him yet, Nico is our rabbinic intern. He sometimes teaches where I'm standing or in parallel in Pilch. And Nico, and then I'll come over here to Michael. Yeah. Great. So they're incredibly expensive. It may take a lot of resources in order to acquire one. And therefore, if I get one, I might hold on to it. It might wind up in one of these questionable states, and I might have to ask about it. Great. What else? It might be Shemitah. And I'm going to expand upon that as well. So what Michael said is it might be Shemitah, meaning that you might be in a year in which you are not permitted to harvest from the land that is in the land of Israel where the etrogim are growing. And therefore, you may have to have acquired it previously or have acquired it from a source from which it may have been shriveled or dried and have these questions. And I'll add to that that you may just generally be in a position in which you were unable to, you may just be in a questionable harvest situation in regard to them, because in addition to them being difficult to acquire in terms of the fact that they might be expensive, or you might, it might be in general hard to find one where you are. It also might be that the crop themselves might have been difficult to come across back at that time. Yeah. Great. So the timing of the Chag might fall out such that what if you didn't actually acquire one? Because again, it could be a harvest issue, it could be an acquisition issue in general, but what if you had a dried one? And wouldn't it be better to have a shriveled or a dried one than not to have one at all? And then you could bring in the other part of this, by the way, like you might ask the question, what's better if I don't yet have my fresh etrog? I ordered it from Amazon. Just kidding. It didn't arrive in time. And now my question is, do I bring a pomegranate? Do I bring a dried out etrog, perhaps from last year? Or do I bring nothing at all? Okay, great. We're going to pause it there. Wonderful answers. I really appreciate all of this and all of these ideas. What I want to do is to go to the last source, skip over Brachot 57a, because I want us to actually finish on time. I'm afraid that if we get into that, we might actually not finish on time. But I do want to let you know, Joey, that at the end of that previous source, if you look into it, that lulav gets reread as lo lev, not lo as in lamed aleph, but lo as in ascribing to that person, lo lev, he has a heart or they have a heart. So a lulav, if you read it with different vowelization, he has a heart. So it's a really beautiful, read it on your own time, because I want to finish this all together. I want to go to this last part of the Talmud, and I want to offer you a way of thinking about etrog and acquisition and all of the challenges that we might come across. And a lesson about flexible thinking. Amar Mar, the master stated, Mar as in someone named Mar, whom we hear from often actually in Sukkot, in Masachet Sukkah often. Amar Mar, lo matzah etrog, if he didn't find an etrog. Okay, all right, now he hasn't found one. Amazon definitely is way behind on shipping. He doesn't have one in time. Lo yavi lo rimon, velo parish velo davar acher. He shouldn't bring anything else. Not the pomegranate, not the quince, nothing else. Pshita. The Gemara says, shouldn't that be obvious? Mahu detema. So, like, why bring this up? What's the point of saying this? Lest you say, laite or late. I don't like their vowelization. Ki heichi shelo tishachach torat etrog, so that the category of etrog not be forgotten. Ka mashmalan, zimnin denafek churba mine, deate lemisrach. Because Rabbi Yehuda teaches us that it is prohibited, meaning he's referring back to the previous teaching from Rabbi Yehuda, because there's going to be some sort of a churba, a destruction from this practice, because some might wind up doing this even when etrogim are available. Why might people, I'll take a couple of suggestions, why might people wind up bringing a quince or a pomegranate or I don't know, what's your favorite fruit? A watermelon, a dragon fruit, a lemon, right? Right. Well, if I have a lemon tree, if it's in my backyard, might I bring it because it is the choicest fruit that I have in my backyard? Right? Might it be? It's very possible that it might be. Okay. Well, looks like, can't I just substitute it? Won't it be the thing? Don't I want it? Don't I want it to be permitted? Okay. So here is the lesson of this extraordinary Gemara, in my opinion. I think that one would think that the lesson of the Gemara would actually be inverted. I actually would have thought that dry etrogim would not have been permitted. I would have thought, especially Rabbi Yehuda, would not have permitted the dry etrogim whatsoever. In fact, I would have thought that the fresh fruit would have been the thing that would have been preferable to bringing anything dried because of the notion of pre-Eitz Hadar. I would have thought, given the notion of pre-Eitz Hadar from the Torah, that we would have learned that we are supposed to learn in every generation what Peri Eitz Hadar is for our generation, and then assume that, and then bring that along. And then, therefore, if I didn't have an etrog freshly, then I should bring whatever my Peri Eitz Hadar is. And the whole point is to bring your choicest fruit. That's what I would have thought. But the exact opposite is what is taught in the Talmud. In the Talmud, we learn even a dry etrog can be kasher. Even yavesh, it's okay, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And it's not okay to bring anything besides an etrog, lest we forget what an etrog is, lest we forget what the Torah of an etrog is. Shelo tishachach Torat etrog, lest we forget what the Torah of an etrog is. Most of the time in life, I think this is the wrong way to think about things. We need to practice much more flexible thinking about most of what we do. It is not smart to decide at 8 or 9 in the morning that I want to eat this dish from this restaurant tonight that I'd like delivered at that time, and then get to that time at night, order from that restaurant, find out that they don't have that dish at that restaurant, and decide that the best possible thing would be that I shouldn't eat dinner. That's not great thinking. That's not how we go through life most of the time, right? Most of the time, ideally, we shouldn't set out to say that there's only one singular thing that will do in a circumstance or in a scenario. The lesson of the etrog isn't to teach us to think more like this more of the time. The lesson of the etrog is that the etrog is the exception. The lesson of the etrog is that the etrog is the exception. Most of the time in life, we should be blessed to think more flexibly, because all of the ideas that you came up with are the way that we cope and strategize to live well, to nourish ourselves, to save resources, to think wisely, to live nicely with our families, to live in community. This is how we strategize to live every day. The etrog is the exception. We come and we pick out these really beautiful yellow fruit, and we pick them out of boxes, and we feel a little bit silly that we don't just go and pick the lemon from our backyard, or we don't just pull out the one that we dried from last year. But it's the exception to the rule. So when we finish Sukkot this year, and even before we finish it, I want to encourage you to remember that it's the exception, and that we should, most of the time, be blessed that the beautification of things in our life isn't to make sure that we have the exact perfect thing. That's what makes the etrog so special, is that it has to be exactly perfect. Everything else in our life doesn't need to be exactly perfect. And when we don't make it so that everything in our life has to be exactly perfect, life is a heck of a lot nicer for us and for all the other people who we are around as well. That is the Torat etrog. That's the Torah of the etrog. So with that, we're going to wrap our learning. I'm going to invite somebody who washed and ate bread to lead us in Birkat Hamazon for Shabbat and Sukkot by leading us in Shir Hamalot and the Zimun and the first paragraph of benching, which we can find on page 45. And these ones are 42. 47? Something like, okay, 42 in the older ones, 47 in the newer. So we'll bench, and then we'll do Kaddish Rabbanon and Maariv. Someone want to lead us in benching who washed and had bread? Someone who, you had bread?
Shir hamalot b'shuv Adonai et shivat Zion hayinu kecholamim azim ale sechok pinu ulshonenu rina az yomeru vagoyim higdil Adonai la soti mele higdil Adonai la soti manu hayinu semechim shuva Adonai et shivitenu ka'afikim ba negev Hazorim bedima berina iktoru halochelech uvacho no se meshech hazara bo yavo verina no se alumotav tehilat Adonai yedaber pi vivarech kol basar shim kodshul elam va'ed va'anachnu nivarech yah me'atav yad elam hallelujah. Hodu ladonai ki tov ki lilam chasto mi emalel gevurot Adonai yashmiya kol tehilato. Chave Ryan Varech. Yehishim Adonai Mavrach Metavi Adolam. Yeshut Chave Ryan to Rechel Hinu Shechal Nami Shilo. Baruch Elohim Shechal Nami Shilo Tavo. Chayinu Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Hazan Et Haolam Kulo Betuvo B'chein Bechesed Uvrachamim Notein Lechem L'chol Basar Ki L'olam Chasdo Uvtuvo Hagadol Tamid L'chasar Lanu Ve'ayachsar Lanu Mazon L'olam Va'ed Bavur Shemo Hagadol Kiwelzan Umfarnes Lakol Umetiv Lakol Umechin Mazon L'chol Beriotav Asher Bara Baruch Atah Adonai Hazan et HaKol Nedelech Adonai.
In just a moment, we'll turn to page 38 in our Ziering for Kaddish de Rabbanan. Customarily, it's recited by those who are in mourning, but anybody who studied Torah is also welcome to join in. Oh, thank you. Page 38. Yit Gadal V'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah Be'alma Divra Kirute V'yamlich Malchute V'chayechon V'yomechon U'chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala U'bizman Kari V'imru Amen Yehi Shemei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Ulamei Amaya Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnase V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shemei Dekudsha Barechu Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, tamiran be'alma v'imru amen. Al Yisrael ve'al Rabbanan ve'al Talmidehon, ve'al kol Talmidehon, ve'al kol man de'askin be'oraita, di ve'atra hadain ve'di ve'chol atar v'atar. Yehi lehon uchon shlama rabbah, china v'chista v'rachamin, v'chayin arichin umzona revicha, Uforkana min kazam avohon divishmaya v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Hosei shalom b'mromav hu barachamav yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Invite you to turn to page 46 in your Ziering. Or wait, is that the right page?
39A.
Oh, 39A. Thank you. You're right. It's page 39A for the beginning of Yom Tov Maariv for Sukkot. As a reminder, and I will remind us when we get to the Amidah, no more insertions for Shabbat when we get to the Shabbat places. Page 39A. You're invited to rise for the Baruch Hu, and then after the Baruch Hu, you can be seated. Baruch Hu et Adonai Amivorah. Baruch Adonai Vorach Le'olam Vayit. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'varo Maariv Aravim. Umavir yom umevi layla mavdil ben yom v'leilai Adonai tzvaot shemo echad v'kayam Tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam vayeh Baruch atah Adonai Amariv Aravim Havat olam Beit Yisrael l'chad V'avatachal tasir minu li'olamim Baruch atah Adonai Ohev amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Yeah, I'm trying to. Adonai Elohechem emet. Page 43A on to page 44. Umalchut beratzon gimel lehem Moshe v'bnei Yisrael lechanu shira v'simcha rabah v'yameru chulam michamocha v'elim Adonai mikamocha nedar b'kodesh nurati lo tzosei fele מלכותך רובנך בוקיים לפני משה זילי אנו יאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כפת אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני ישראל אשכיבנו אדוני לעילא לשמור Ufros aleinu sukat shalom baruch atah Adonai. Havare sukat shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'ha Yerushalayim. We rise on page 46. Vaydaber Moshe et mod Adonai el bnei Yisrael. Yikadav yikadav shemer ava. Yomadi v'rach yirtiv yamlik b'chutei b'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayidachol beit Yisrael. V'galav yizman kariv v'imru amnahin. Yishmir avamarach le'elam le'ayha. Yitvarach v'yishabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. Yitadar v'yitalevi yitalal. Shemiri kodesha v'richu le'elam in kol v'chata v'shirata. Tishbchata v'nekwata. Tamiram v'yalma v'yimru amnahin. Turn to page 306. Be sure to do two things. One is to include the Vatodienu paragraph for the end of Shabbat. And in addition to that, make all insertions for Sukkot. No insertions for Shabbat. We begin on page 306. Kaddish Shalem is found on page 54. Page 54, Kaddish Shalem. Hikatav, hikadash merabah, v'yamati rakir tevim lichvach tevechaychon v'yamechon v'chayit v'chobeit Yisrael bakalach v'zvankar rivim ru amen. Yishmi rabah v'varach v'yalam v'meyamayha yiparach v'shabach v'yipar v'shamam v'nasei v'tadar v'talei v'talash v'medikudesha b'richu leilam in kol berkata v'shirata tishbachata v'nechmata damira v'yama v'imru amen. Titkabat salot unujon d'chol Yisrael kadaba v'hondi v'yishmaya v'imru amen. Yishlam arabah min shamay v'chayim aleinu v'kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Hotzi shalom bimromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'el kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Turn forward to Aleinu, page 56. We rise or remain standing. Aleinu l'shaveach ladon hakol l'tekeru la v'yotzer b'reishis. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Return to page 59 for the psalm for the season, which we'll say through Hoshana Rabbah. לדוד אדוני אורי וישי ממהרה אדוני מעוז חיי ממהרה. לולי האמנתי לראות בטוב אדוני בארץ חיים, קווה אל אדוני חזק ואמץ ליבך וקווה אל אדוני. Mourner's Kaddish is back on page 58. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמה דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירם בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. So we're going to make Kiddush Havdalah for the holiday. We get to do it all in one because first of all, we do Kiddush and Havdalah smushed together. And secondly, we get to do it here in the Sukkah, and we're already in the Sukkah. So here's the order we're going to do it in. I'll say Kiddush. In addition to saying Kiddush, I'm going to include a couple of blessings. The first blessing is for grape juice. The second blessing is going to be for light, because this is the continued light that we're using. It's like our flame, because it's like our continued or of the holiday. So that'll be our Borei Morei Ha'esh. And then for our Hamavdil Ben Kodesh Lekodesh, because God differentiates between different holy seasons. And then finally, we'll say Shechianu and Leshe Basuka. So here we go. We're on page 79 if you want to follow along with most of this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'am, v'romemanu mikol hashon, v'kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'titin lanu Adonai Eloheinu, v'ahava moedim l'simcha, chagim uzmanim l'sason, et yom chag haSukkot hazeh zeman simchatenu, mikra kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, kivanu v'charta, v'tanu kishash mikol ha'am. Amin. Moedei kodecha b'simcha v'sasonin chatanu. Baruch atah Adonai v'kadesh Yisrael le'hazemanim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei norei ha'ish. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, ben ortei choshev ben Yisrael la'amim ben yom hashvi'it. לששת ימי המעשה, בין קדושת שבת לקדושת יום טוב הבדלת, ואת יום השביעי מששת ימי המעשה קידשת, הבדלת וקידשת את עמך ישראל בקדושתך, ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לקודש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגענו לזמן הזה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לשב בסוכה. I wish you a good Yontif, a Chag Sameach, a very, very happy Sukkot. Services tomorrow morning begin at 9:30. There was only one service on campus. Bring your lulav and etrog. If you don't have one, we will give you one tomorrow. What's that? What if it's a dried one? I have something to tell you about it. Oh, that's a great. That was fast. That was very good. Very good. Thanks for being here, Ganyanta.
Did she get off? She's up there. Oh, back's the back table and everyone.
Yes, you. Oh, you're in one screen. Marlies, you're two places.
Yeah.
Notice the mask on her.
Yeah.